Hey, everybody, it's Dave here, Darren over there, where your two old bloggers been publicly commenting on the Minnesota Vikings for a very, very, very long time. And we just went through another draft. We're going to talk about it today. We're going to talk about all the players we drafted, all the UDFAs, and then we're going to get into some extra tidbits, some related to the draft, some not, and this week in Vikings land. All next on Two Old Bloggers. Let's rock! Vikings First and SKOL presents This Week in Vikings Land with Darren and Dave, your two old bloggers. Hey everyone, Dave here and Darren over there. How are things in the Great White North there, buddy?
Oh, getting a little bit better, but Dave, are you drafted out yet? Have you overdosed on the NFL draft, the Vikings draft?
Well, not quite, but I am exhausted. It's been a long weekend, and I wanted to thank everybody that is here today, from Dan, Daniel, Ms. Mary, Doc Proto, John Musgrove, pardon me. Biggs is here, Peter's here, Land of Ice and Snow, Chuck, Mafia's here. Just great people. Road SKOL, good to see you. And, of course, good old Raymond. All welcome. And same to you, Brian. It's been a long week. And I want to thank everybody that watched all our shows through, the pre-draft all the way through till today. You guys absolutely rock. We had a very, very good showing, and we appreciate it all. Now, for this episode, I sort of clickbaited it. Vikings Donovan Jackson, the next Randall, McDaniel, or bust. Now, I have a definite opinion on this. And do I think he's going to be Randall McDaniel? That's going to be hard to achieve. But a bust? But we'll get into it next with Theme 1. All right, let's turn on, boom, the draft.
Yeah, Dave, of course, you've been a workhorse all week since Thursday and before on this draft content, you and Tyler. Yesterday, I jumped on with you, Tyler, and Jonas. And yeah, thanks to everybody who showed up. There was like over 300 people watching the whole time that I was there, which is fantastic, and all kinds of great commentary on the comments. So thank you so much for people who took some time out of their day, a lot of time for some of you to listen to us all talk about the draft and continue the conversation on it. I can't thank you enough about that. So we're now 24 hours roughly, maybe not quite, because the draft ended about 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time yesterday. That's when the seventh round, but roughly about 24 hours since the draft concluded. And so most of you have read the hot takes. You've seen the draft grades given out by the NFL media on this and those that cover the Vikings. And so do you really need to hear about another take on the draft picks and how somebody felt that the Vikings fared during it? Maybe not, but I'm going to do it anyway. And I when I was thinking about how to describe this draft, Dave, and you let me know how you feel, I think what did come to me is that this draft did lack, I think, some sizzle or some spice, if you're, like Sal Spice. Last year was a lot different, right? Like the Vikings made 2 trades on day one. Everybody was like very excited about who the Vikings were going to pick for the franchise quarterback. They get JJ McCarthy, and then they made a very aggressive and some people thought reckless move with the amount of draft capital they gave up to get the best edge rusher, or who was considered the best edge rusher in every draft rundown that I saw, in Dallas Turner last year. Now, those were two two potentially franchise-altering moves that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah made in last year's draft. God damn, that's a lot of sizzle that was done last year on day one. Now, days 2 and day 3 weren't as exciting, but there was a lot to be jazzed about with what the Vikings did on day 1, and a lot to talk about whether particularly the Turner trade was the right thing to do. But again, lots of sizzle there. This year, it just wasn't that. And the Vikings, I knew they would consider, like I felt, trade down on day 1. That's what the Vikings should do. That's what I hope that they do. They didn't do that, even though they had opportunities to do that, it appears. And they stayed at 24, and then they didn't have. Then ended up they only had 1 pick in the top 100 of the draft. So, and 3 of our 5 picks were late in day 3. At a stage where you're getting developmental guys. Are they going to turn into anything at all? You never know. And the odds show that most of the time they don't really become impact players or even useful players in the NFL. And I think that's why the draft, again, part of the reason why it lacks sizzle, the amount of picks we had, the lack of activity that we made on day 1 in particular, staying at 24. But that doesn't mean that this was a bad draft, even if it lacks sizzle. So let's get into those 5 selections, with the first being number 24, Donovan Jackson. And like I said yesterday, Dave, probably the least sexy first-round pick an NFL team can make. It's a tie, I think, between a guard and if you pick a center. And Donovan Jackson, it's just there's going to be no 400-yard passing games by Donovan Jackson in his career. No 100-yard rushing games. No 100-yard receiving games. No 3-sack games. No 2 interception games. If Donovan Jackson is really good at his job, we'll never notice him. Because offensive linemen and guards, they tend to get noticed when a commentator during the game says, hey, on a replay, this guy got pancaked and he gave up a sack, or they're called for holding or false starts. That's when you notice offensive linemen and guards in particular. And so if Donovan Jackson is doing a really good job as a Viking, we're never going to hear his name called out very much during telecasts, and the average NFL fan is not going to notice him at all. So that's a good thing, but it makes for, like I said, a less exciting, sexy pick. But again, doesn't mean he wasn't needed. And it doesn't mean it was a bad pick. And the reason that I was not excited about this pick when it was announced, even though I know Mel Kiper had mocked Donovan Jackson to the Vikings, and he was right, as he often is in the first round. But I'm on board with this pick, Dave. Every scouting report I've seen on Donovan Jackson is very positive. And the things that he does well, or his athletic traits, his length, his size, his anchor, his ability to move and get out into space, are very laudable and impressive. He played for one of the top 5 programs in college football and was a starter every year while he was there. Now, some of the things that he's knocked for, a little bit of technique flaws, the most part, I think that those things can be cleaned up with very good coaching, which remains to be seen if we have that on the Vikings offensive line. But, Donovan Jackson is a very good prospect and was one of the top 3 guards in this draft. And there's a lot of more value being put into the interior guys now than there was even 2 or 3 years ago. So I'm on board with this pick, especially because what was the weak link on the Vikings offensive line after free agency was over? It was Blake Randall at left guard, who really struggled as the year went on as a starter and last year. And after the Vikings got steamrolled by the Rams front 7 in that very dispiriting wild card loss, the Vikings had to do something about that. They did in free agency, and then they did it in the draft with Jackson. It's pretty clear he's going to replace Blake Randall as the starting left guard, and he could be the missing link to an offensive line that could be really, really special if Jackson plays as we hope and expect him to play. And it even helps the depth of the Vikings because now you get to kick Randall to a depth backup position as a swing guard or a swing tackle, which I think is more his jam and more the role that he's suited for at the pro level. So
I agree. And it happened. People say that we didn't get value with this pick. And the whole value thing was that he was ranked like 20 spots below. But
by who?
Well, even the consensus board, a Reeves consensus board, he was. But that's still within the range when we talked about that 10 to 50 range, all being the same.
Yeah.
But
especially in this draft,
right,
where there was where I heard at one point, Dave, that somebody said that they only had like 10 or 15 first round grades on all the prospects in this draft.
Right. And everybody else was flat, you know, until we got into day 3. And then that was flat too, but not at the same level. And the draft, everybody was so bullish on linemen. We had to run on the offensive tackles. A bunch of those went off quick. We had to run on defensive tackles. Those went off quick. Then we had the guards start to go. And first Booker, and then at 13 to Seattle, Gray Zabel went. And would I have wanted Gray Zabel? Oh, you know I did. He was my draft crush. But the more I read about Jackson, there was only 3 guards that was worthy of this pick. And Jackson obviously is one of them. The more I read about Jackson, a lot of evaluators had him the best guard out of those 3. And we got him when we did because he wouldn't have lasted past the next pick.
That's right.
Was Houston. Now people say, well, everybody was getting trade down offers and Minnesota probably did. And we should have traded and built up picks. Well, if we would have traded down, then we lose him. We're going to then have to draft a guard a little bit later and reach for one. And so the reaching for one would have canceled out any of that value, you know, that we hope to have gained by trading down. So I think this was a brilliant pick. I think Jackson's going to thrive. Absolutely. You know, hey, he's parked next to Kelly and he's parked next to the big man and Christian Darrisaw. You can't have 2 better mentors beside you than they have. And as I was telling the Drewster this morning, football is a weak link system. We've talked about O-line being weak link, offense being weak link, defense, basically all football is. We just, in one pick, improved the weakest link on the offense. And that is bound to move the needle. And we'll get into why it was needed here in the third team. But boy, I loved it. I thought this was great. And as Edwin says, I nailed it. That's why the draft is unpredictable. You don't know when runs are going to be made. So, and Sarah, I'll bet Texan fans were pissed off because you know he was going just the next spot. So we will see. And Daniel says he hopes he's a Vikings lifer. I do too.
Hey, as you talked about the next Randall McDaniel. In 1988, the Vikings selected Randall McDaniel at guard. That turned out pretty well for the Vikings. If Jackson has anywhere near the career that guy had, we'll be pretty happy about this selection, and we won't be talking about the failed trades down or the trades down that the Kwesi Adofo-Mensah did not take and accept in like 10 years time. Like I said, if Jackson's made multiple Pro Bowls and solidified this offensive line, or
even if he's just good.
Well, yes.
and anchors it for 10 years. How long have we been bitching about the O-line? 10, 15 years?
Ever since I've known you, Dave, which is, over a decade. We talk about it every year.
Yeah.
We talk about it every year. And Mike Zimmer, that famous, when did he make the famous quote? Was it 2018 or whatever? We're going to fix this. The Vikings never fixed it. This is the most serious intent the Vikings have made at fixing the offensive line in a long, long time. And we're going to get into that a little bit later too.
Yep. Well,
that's Donovan Jackson.
Yes. And our next pick was Felton, a wide receiver from Maryland.
I also like this pick, Dave. And the thing about, and I like it because coming into the draft, wide receiver became a need. Just looking at the Vikings, yes, you've got Justin Jefferson and you got Jordan Addison, and Addison potentially facing a 3-game suspension is not a reason to draft another wide receiver, because that's a temporary absence if it even ends up being an absence. But Jalen Nailor's in the last year of his rookie contract, and Rondell Moore is recovering from a serious knee injury and is only on a 1-year deal. So the Vikings needed to add some young depth at this position, and somebody who can potentially challenge Nailor and Rondell Moore this year, or at least be on a cheap rookie contract for the next 4 years that they can develop and that Keenan McCardell can work with during that time. And Felton is coming off a year where he had 96 catches, he had 1,124 yards and 9 touchdown passes for a very bad Maryland team. They finished 4-8, and he had somebody named Billy Edwards Jr. throwing him the ball.
Yeah, it was supposedly, I could throw it harder and I've got a bum shoulder type deal.
Ran a 4.37 at the combine, so he's fast. Might be the fastest wide receiver on the Vikings roster right now. And 6'1", so he's got 6'1", around 6'1", 6'2", could be the tallest wide receiver we have. Maybe Tim Jones is just as tall, but so a pretty good route runner. What I read is, again, he's got the speed, pretty good at taking a short stuff and taking it to the house. Good at avoiding tackles, slippery in the field and making guys miss. So a lot to like there. But again, a little bit slim at not his build is 183 pounds. Yeah. So the knock on him is that he's going to struggle if defensive backs get physical with him, and he has struggled with getting a clean release off the line of scrimmage. So those are things we're going to work with. But again, he's not going to be expected, I think, to play a major role in the Vikings offense this year. Not with Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and Jalen Nailor there, and Rondell Moore when eventually he gets healthy. So he's got time to develop. He's got time to get into an NFL strength training program and add a little bit of quality bulk and work on his craft and work with Keenan McCardell, one of the best in the business, I think, at that craft. And so probably special teams is going to be where he's going to make an impact this year, but the Vikings needed to find a talented wide receiver to develop. And again, so maybe in 2025, when Jalen Nailor potentially is not a Viking anymore, Felton slides into the role as your number 3 wide receiver. And hey, when was the last time we drafted a Maryland wide receiver, David?
SKOL Mafia. Thank you so very much.
2015.
Yes. And it turned out to be a pretty interesting selection.
Yeah, it was a sweet selection, interesting career, and not a great ending for Diggsy in Minnesota. But hey, again, like McDaniel getting drafted at guard in 1988 and the career he had, if Felton can have the kind of impact that Diggsy had with Minnesota, we'll be very, very happy with this. So I like this pick. Also like the 5th round selection we made, Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins, a guy the Vikings had in for a top 30 visit. They also had Jackson in for a top 30 visit. They met with Felton too, but he wasn't a top 30 visit, I believe. But anyway, Ingram-Dawkins, one of those guys, like he's got all the athletic traits to be a successful defensive lineman. in the NFL, but he hasn't really played much, and he didn't have much production until this year at Georgia. Now, you remember it's Georgia. They usually have a stacked roster, especially on defense. They frequently rotate guys in, and they're very, very deep. So it's tough to get a lot of snaps on Georgia, even if you're good. Now,
if I remember correctly, the 2 tackles that were ahead of him went ahead of him in the draft.
Yes. I think so. This is a guy, again, a 5th round pick. He's a project, but scouting reports again sound very robust on this guy. I think Lance Zierlein from NFL.com had a quote where he said about Ingram-Dawkins, he's ready to do it with the tools to do it, but still learning how to do it. So a project. Again, like Felton, you've got Javon Hargrave, Jonathan Allen, Harrison Phillips, Jalen Redmond in the fold on the defensive line. Drake Rodriguez, who's being to his 2nd year. These guys are all going to be taking the majority of the snaps early on for the Vikings. So Ingram-Dawkins, again, can work on his craft. He's not going to be expected or needed to have a major role for the Vikings in 2025. So he can learn to be a pro. And it might take him a year or two to develop into the player that he can be. But that's what happens usually with 5th round picks and 6th round picks. They take 2 to 3 years to marinate and, soak in the coaching at the NFL level, and then progress to where they're ready to play meaningful snaps on the defensive or the offensive side of the ball. And that's what this guy is. But he's got pass rushing upside. He's got a good anchor in the run, from what I can gather. He struggles with diagnosing plays and that sort of thing, which is expected because he hasn't played a whole lot. So he's going to have to learn that stuff.
Yeah, and I've also heard he's got an exceptionally quick get off, which is outstanding. He'll be taught and he'll learn from obviously some of the best.
Yes,
and I think he's going to be. You will see him probably work his way into the rotation this season. And we'll see how he does. I look forward to seeing him in mini camp and training camp and preseason games. But I think it was a good selection. Very much so.
I liked it too. And the 2 6th round selections, Kobe King from Penn State, the on the ball linebacker, and Gavin Bartholomew, the tight end. These are guys who their role this year, if they have a role, is going to be on special teams in 2025. There's no doubt about it. Kobe King, it looks like the Vikings may have gotten a bit of a steal here. He's certainly going to challenge and probably take Brian Asamoah's roster spot when it's all said and done. And he's a guy like a 2-down King, 2-down thumper, big time tackler, not very good in pass coverage. So in some ways, a bit like Ivan Pace Jr. Blitzing wise, he can do that. But he's got, the scouting reports I read, they said he's got starter potential down the road, but not in 2025. And that's okay, because you've got Ivan Pace Jr. and you've got Eric Wilson as a veteran backup in case him or Cashman were to get hurt. So King's a guy who has some promise and has some potential. Kind of feels like a bit like old Jasper Brinkley, right, Dave? Where a 2-down, traditional, stuff the run linebacker, very physical, but you don't want him covering tight ends or a slot receiver,
right, going across the middle,
or running backs. And then Bartholomew, the Vikings needed a 3rd tight end, and that's probably what his role is going to be this year. And you got TJ Hawkinson and Josh Oliver, who are your number 1 and number 2, and they're going to play the majority of the snaps, and they should, if they're healthy, and let's hope that they are. And Bartholomew is going to probably play not very much. He's going to have a Johnny Munt role, which is like maybe 5 or 6 snaps a game, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. I hear he's a really hardworking kid, great leadership skills, has pass rushing, pass catching upside. Very willing blocker, shows great effort in everything he does, needs to get stronger. And again, so he's not going to have a major role with the Vikings in 2025. He's going to get a chance to get in the weight room with the Vikings strength and training staff and add some quality bulk, get stronger, and be able to hold up with a little bit added bulk and better technique, hold up at the NFL level. And again, King and Bartholomew, special teams this year, but in 2026 and 2027, when some other players have gone, might be ready to, ascend to larger roles on the team.
Now, I've always said it takes tight ends are drafted for their next team, so it takes a while. It's one of the slowest, or is the slowest position to make the transition. One thing,
Tyler Conklin being an example.
Yeah, a very good example. One thing I hope they coach him out of is closing his eyes at the catch. And it's the picture I've got. He closed his eyes, and it just, that irritates me. But it does happen. I get it. But you blink, and maybe that's when the camera caught it. But you want to see the ball into your hands.
Yeah. So, I think I talked earlier, Dave, about the lack of sizzle with this draft. I think a few things final thoughts on this is that this draft right now, Dave, for 2025, you've got a 5-man class, and really only one, Donovan Jackson, is going to play a major role for the Vikings in 2025. The other 4 are, again, developmental guys who are going to play mostly special teams and might have a small role on offense or defense, if at all. And a lot of times would be considered a bad draft class for an NFL team. But with the work that the Vikings have done the last 2 years in free agency in particular, this roster, as we said before, Dave, is very strong throughout. And so most of this class, they were not expected or needed to jump in and play 50 or 60 offensive or defensive snaps for the Vikings this year. And those other 4 guys have the time to develop and grow into being legit NFL players who can play multiple snaps and quality snaps, whether it's on offense or defense. So because of the work that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and the front office have done, particularly with free agency in the past couple of years, we were not in a situation this year where we needed all 5 of our draft class to be in major roles with the Vikings right now.
Yes. And I know people view that as, oh my God, we don't get anybody, other than Jackson as a starter. Well, hey, we didn't need to. And that's why the trade downs and getting the lower picks, because the trades from last year and TJ Hawkinson and all that, to get players that did do that. Now we're at the point where let's look at guys to build. Everybody complains about how Green Bay finds quality people in the draft and they develop them. We're now at the point where we're finding quality people in the draft, and we have the luxury of developing them, where it's not an emergency that, oh my God, we absolutely need this guy, and we need that guy, and we need this guy, or we're a disaster anymore. And that is wonderful. It's been forever since we've been in that position, and it's sweet.
It is. Jarrett makes a point there about this is the last year we can afford not to come away with several contributors from the draft. And going all free agency isn't sustainable. And I'm going to touch on that a little bit later in the show, but just keep that point in mind, because it is important to keep in mind. And it's true. Free agency it's a one tool to build your roster, but it's an expensive tool eventually. And and you've got to watch out for that.
Kwesi said there's 3 buckets.
Yep.
There's free agency, there's drafting, and there's trading. And when you get to free agency and trading, they have costs. And the cheapest way is via draft. But you got to blend all 3 to make a championship level team. And I think he's done that. The whole plan since they were hired was to get to this point. And I like that they've gotten here.
Yes. A couple other final points about this draft is that what the Vikings didn't do in this was address cornerback and running back. And you and Tyler talked about that during the weekend as well, but a little bit worrisome. Now, this wasn't what I read wasn't a strong cornerback class, so that's one thing to keep in mind. And after the first round pick, where we went Donovan Jackson, and then we picked Felton with the last comp pick in the third round, which is really the fourth round. At that point, Dave, are you going to get in a weak cornerback class? Are you going to get a cornerback who's going to really make a difference this year anyway? Probably not. But still, Byron Murphy Jr., yes, we signed him. He is a legit quality starting cornerback in the NFL. But the rest of our room, Dave, not so much. Isaiah Rodgers, promising, but there's question marks about him being whether he can hold up on a full-time role at the NFL level.
And Brian Flores is excited about this kid.
He is very, which is a good sign, but still no guarantee. Jeff Okudah, been a bust his entire career. Is he suddenly going to turn it on and be better in Minnesota under Flores? We hope so, hopefully. But it's certainly not guaranteed. Mekhi Blackmon, promising rookie season, but again, is he going to ascend to being a quality or an even better than that starting cornerback in the NFL? We don't know. We're going to find out.
Off the ACL injury.
ACL. And then Dwight McGlothern wasn't drafted last year, made the team. We feel good about him. But again, would you feel good about him playing significant amount of snaps right off the bat in 2025? I wouldn't. So I think the Vikings have got to. Does this mean they have to add a veteran cornerback here? Tavares Thomas, he's another guy, a free agent signing. Mostly a special teams guy, has played a fair amount in the past, but not recently. Can we depend on him to take a bigger role if he has to? Don't know. So I think the Vikings do have to, and in the undrafted rookie free agents, they signed a couple of corners, but nobody, I think, of note at this point in time. So I don't think there's going to be help there. So I think a veteran is going to be added here. Who it's going to be, I don't know, but Shaq Griffin is still out there. You've got Stephon Gilmore still out there. I don't think he's retired. Mike Hilton's still out there. Rasul Douglas is still out there. All of these guys are over 30, and Gilmore, I think, will turn 35 soon. So a bit long in the tooth, but Griffin played solidly for the Vikings as the number 3 corner last year. I would not be upset if Griffin had a reunion with the Vikings for 1 year, or the Vikings signed Rasul Douglas or Gilmore or Mike Hilton. But I think they're going to have to sign, or even Fabian Moreau, who's still out there and a free agent and played for the Vikings last year and was our number 4 corner. So they've got to do something there, and I think they will, and they are going to add a vet. Who it's going to be, we don't know, but I think they do need to add one. And then at running back, there were one of the best running back classes in recent memory. We thought the Vikings might select one. 25 running backs got selected in this draft, and the Vikings didn't sign any of them. So does that mean Ty Chandler's roster spot is safe at this point? It appears so. But they've only signed one running back as an undrafted rookie free agents, and we'll talk about him later as well. So just a couple of spots there the Vikings didn't address. And like any draft, especially when you only have 5 picks, you can't address everything, but just something to keep in mind.
And they turned 4 picks into 5, as we know,
yes.
And then gathered a backup quarterback in the process. And the 5 picks ties us with our lowest ever. It had been done twice before by the Vikings. But I thought with the assets we had and building on what we had gotten in free agency, it was a good draft. It was solid. Was it spectacular and wowing? No, it was just a solid, good draft. And it improves the team. And that's what you want out of the draft.
You sure do.
Mm-hmm.
And if we have to wait, guys like Felton, Ingram-Dawkins, King, and Bartholomew, look at them as kind of the Josh Metellus kind of draft pick, where they need, again, a couple of years of coaching and development before they potentially will ascend to a much more prominent role with the Vikings. Metellus was a 6th-round pick. It took him 2 years of just working and grinding on special teams before he got a shot. And then when he did, he made the most of it.
Well, remember, he got cut originally off of the practice squad. And they brought him back, and it took a while for him to get to where he is. And it's great that he did.
Yes.
So Curtis says we need to relax on the corner group. They'll be fine. I agree.
I hope you're right, but I do have concerns.
All right, now on to theme 2. Sorry, folks, but this one's going to be very light on graphics, as in 1. All right. Yeah. The UDFAs. I've got 19 here. Gary said we're up to 20 already.
I took a quick check on the Minnesota, the Vikings.com website just before the show, and we were still at showing 19 there, as well as a few other sites. So I'd be interested to see who the 20th was. There has been some talk about this already in the chat, so thank you and keep on talking. Just a few draft odds and ends to close things off on this, but did want to talk about the undrafted rookie free agents. And this has been a pretty fruitful route that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and the Vikings have used the past couple of years to get guys at either, whether it's Ivan Pace Jr. or Bo Richter or Taki Taimani or Dwight McLaughlin or Gabe Murphy, where you've gotten guys that either are playing now prominent roles with the Vikings on offense and defense, or they were able to make the 53 and contribute on special teams and maybe eventually a long snapper. I see. Yeah. and potentially could be playing more significant roles in the future. But, looking at this list, we expected the Vikings would be active, and they are. By 2 hours after the draft, there was 19 players that they had signed. And there you have them, Dave.
Yeah,
just looking at
Biggs, I have the punter already on there. It's the long snapper I do not.
So yeah, looking at that, I didn't see anybody that looked like egregiously shouldn't have been drafted compared to somebody like Ivan Pace Jr. or Gabe Murphy last year. But and no one on this list stands out to me as somebody who might be able to flash like those guys did in the previous couple of training camps and preseasons. But there are 3 guys out of that list: Chambliss from Georgia, the edge guy; Joe Huber, the guard center from Wisconsin; and then Tyler Batty from BYU, kind of the edge defensive end. They, looking at NFL.com, they had those guys as with draftable grades, anywhere from 5 to 7, and they didn't get drafted. So interesting there. I think another interesting one is Oscar Chapman, the punter from Auburn. It looks like the Vikings, what they've been doing the past 2 preseasons, they seem to feel that they're looking to get rid of Ryan Wright, but they still haven't. Well, Chapman is going to be providing competition for Wright. He averaged 45.3 yards per punt in Auburn during his time, so he's got a big leg, and Ryan Wright is going to have to fight for his job once again as punter.
Yeah, and he's got, I saw a picture of him online. He's a fashion guy. I think he's from somewhere in Europe. He is the international exemption on this. So he very well make the team and beat out Wright.
Yes. A lot of mentions about Logan Brown, the offensive lineman from Kansas, in there, as he should have been drafted. And I didn't know much about him, but others will as well. But, Chambliss was, I got a bit excited about him because last year he was tied for the lead at Georgia with 6.5 sacks for the team lead. So I thought, hey, how about this guy? Now, the 3 previous years with Georgia, he only had 2.5 sacks in total. 6'1", about 200, listed at 246. So he's very similar in size to Bo Richter, who was listed at 6'1", 248. But I think the difference here is that Richter is like kind of an athletic freak. His 40, his 10-yard split, his vertical were off the charts good. And Chambliss isn't quite there on the athletic score. And he's same size as Richter, pretty undersized for kind of an edge outside linebacker guy. But so I don't know what his future will be, but he'll be a guy to monitor and a guy who had a draftable grade, according to NFL.com. Huber is a guy who's, I read, very athletic, but struggles with power and, and having a good anchor. Kind of sounds like somebody we just released, Dave. who was a center. And then Tyler Batty is like a very strong kid, but only had the most sacks he ever had in 5 years at BYU was 2.5 in a season. And he's already 25 years old, going on 26. So he's a guy who had a draftable grade, but he's very old. And as far as pass rushing juice, wasn't really particularly notable there. Productive. Anyway, some names there. Those are the kind of the most notable. People are mentioning Logan Brown. I don't know much about him, but hey, the Vikings you always need a lot of depth on offensive line because these guys get hurt. So if Brown really shows out, all power to him. A couple of other interesting names there. Silas Bolden, the wide receiver from Texas, tiny guy. I think he's like 5'8" and 150 pounds or something like that, but ran a 4.37 at the Texas Pro Day. Always use the Pro Day 40 times. Take that with a grain of salt because they're usually not completely accurate, but he is fast. He returned a couple of punt returns, one punt return each the past 2 years, took it to the house. If he makes the Vikings, it would likely be in a punt returner role, special teams role, but he got, I think he got guaranteed $205,000, which was, a very large amount. So that's not always an indication that you're going to make the team, but hey, the Vikings have invested some coin into him. And then we talked just in the previous section about how the Vikings didn't draft a running back. Well, they also only signed one so far at the undrafted rookie free agent list, and it's Trey Stewart from Jacksonville State, small school. And Stewart is a small guy at 5'8", although he's pretty solid at 186. I was watching some highlights last night. He had a real outstanding year at Jacksonville State last year, over 1,600 yards, 5.9 yards per carry, 25 rushing touchdowns. But he was playing at Conference USA. It's not the strongest, level of competition. And he had 4 or 5 fumbles last year, so he had a bit of a fumbling issue. Remains to be seen whether he can stick. I think, though, the Vikings, my theory is that they were looking to, hoping that they could sign as an undrafted rookie free agent, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt from Arizona, but then he got drafted just 13 picks left in the draft, and another guy that the Vikings had visited with and spent time with, Brashad Smith, had been picked a couple of picks before that. So those were 2 guys that they had top 30 visits with at running back. They got drafted way, way late. And I think the Vikings had to pivot to Stewart when they probably would have preferred signing one of those guys. So again, it's not really a thick, full running back room yet. But, can Stewart challenge Ty Chandler for a role on this team? Don't know. But
we'll
keep
find
an eye
on special teams.
Yes. Keep an eye on him. And a lot of these guys like Batty, Bolden, Max Brosmer will be your 4th camp body quarterback, likely will be kept on the practice roster. He's not going to make the team. But a lot of these guys were top 30 visits for the Vikings. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago, how keep an eye on these because we'll either draft them or sign them as undrafted rookie free agents. And a lot of those top 30 picks were drafted or signed to were part of this 19 or 20 person class.
Yep.
So these are, some of these names are familiar to people. Some of them aren't, but there's always possibility you'll have a Bo Richter in that group, or an Ivan Pace Jr., or a Gabe Murphy, Dwight McLaughlin,
Adam Thielen.
Adam Thielen, who just shows up in OTAs and training camp and preseason and earns a spot on the squad. Who that's going to be, we don't know, but we've given you some names anyway to think about.
Mm-hmm. And you were going to ask me, do any of these names catch my eye?
Yes.
And besides Chapman at punter, and he's got a chance to get punter because you don't want to draft specialists, basically. And I'm curious about the long snapper. it will be interesting to see if he surpasses Mr. Wright, and we'll find out. But the ones that got my attention, first off, Max Brosmer from Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
Not that he's the fourth quarterback in the room, but they gave him the full $250,000 signing bonus to be the fourth quarterback in the room. So
right.
That means they have a very large investment in him. And not only is he going to be the camp arm, he will probably go to practice squad afterwards for development and hopefully turn into something eventually. I don't think he's going to beat out Rippon, but who knows? We'll find out. I think it's just, that the quarterback project, lower end quarterback project that KOC loves to do. But the big one that caught my eye and I was sort of rooting for was Ben Urasek from Georgia, the tight end.
Mm-hmm.
We did get two tight ends here. You got Bryson Nesbitt from North Carolina and then Ben Urasek. Urasek was a draftable level tight end. He was tight end 17 mostly across the board, but he showed day 3 type draftable. And he's got good measurements. He's 6'4", 245, smart kid. He went to Stanford, and I think he got his degree there. Then he transferred to Georgia there at the end. He runs a 4.64 40, which for a tight end isn't too bad. He needs more strength, more bulk, and improving his route running. But he's a developmental guy. And I think he may stick, whether he makes the 53, I don't know, but he may stick on the practice squad to develop, like Muse did for so long, and we will see how it goes. And the Bulldog says Urasek is the next Johnny Munt, and I think you're right, because he's decent at blocking, and he likes blocking, and he's decent at pass catching, and he likes pass catching. He's just all around, decent. And for somebody that you're going to develop, that's not bad. Not bad at all. So those are the two that really caught my eye.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be interesting.
Urasek was another guy that was a top 30 visit for the Vikings, as was Nesbitt, the other tight end. Nesbitt's kind of an interesting guy because he's 6'4" or 6'5" and weighs 230 something. So he's really, you look at him on the highlights, and he's like a big wide receiver, basically. He's got no blocking chops whatsoever. And but he had over 500 yards receiving a couple of years at North Carolina. I don't think he's going to make the team, but and if he does, he'll have to catch a shit ton of passes and really impress in that area of the game. But yeah. A lot of kids here, and some of them may end up being on the 53, and a lot of them, several of them will be on the practice squad.
Yeah. So, and hopefully, if Kwesi keeps hitting on the UDFAs, I like that they called them CFAs, college free agents.
Yes.
Versus undrafted free agents, the UDFAs. But same. And
it's easier too.
And it's just but if he hits on one or two, it's another successful UDFA class.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some potentials here. Nothing that screams like Ivan Pace did, but there are potentials just like in the previous years.
Yeah.
It's going to be good. I like that. Well, that brings us to theme 3.
Three already?
Mm-hmm. I believe we are.
Yes.
All right. Theme 3, which is This Week in Vikings Land.
Yes, indeedy. Well, this is going to be heavily focused on the draft too, but a couple of final draft tidbits here.
Hold on 1 second. Beer light is on, Narcius, just to let you know.
Oh, okay. You mentioned a little bit earlier about the 5 draft picks the Vikings had this weekend. That's the fewest that they've had in NFL during the 7 round draft era of the NFL. And they've done it, but it's the fewest they've had, but it happened 2 other times in 2008 and 2009. The Vikings only had a 5-man draft class. And who did we pick in those drafts, you wonder? Well, in 2009, that was the Percy Harvin draft. We picked Percy in the first round, and we picked Phil Lodeholt, big Phil Lodeholt, in the second round that year, our longtime right tackle. Also picked cornerback Asher Allen. Jasper Brinkley was picked that year, as well as Jamarcus Sanford, who ended up being a starting safety for the Vikings for, I think, a couple of years, including 2012 when they made the playoffs. But, Harvey and Lodeholt, Big Phil, were really, really good players for the Vikings. Unfortunately for Harvin, it was for a short time, but Phil was a really good player for us for a long time. So that overall was a pretty solid draft, even though you only had 5 guys. 2008, our first pick was Terrell Johnson, the safety, not such a good player for the Vikings. We didn't get much out of that draft, but except one, John Sullivan, Old Sully, the center. He was a quality player for the Vikings, and he was part of that 2008 class. So just a little bit, walking down memory lane there on previous Vikings drafts where we only had 5 draft picks, just like this year. The other thing that was about draft picks is that since I was thinking about it, since 2023, from 2023 to 2025, Dave, the Vikings have 18 draft picks. That doesn't seem like a lot, and it isn't. That's actually the fewest amongst all NFL teams during that 3-year period. And only Denver, Miami, and Atlanta the Falcons are the only ones that are, close to that. They each have had 19 selections during the last 3 drafts, but we're dead last as far as draft capital the past 3 years. And I bring that up because it mentions there was a previous comment about this, but draft and develop, that's all been the mantra in the NFL about how you build a sustainable football team and franchise. Well, the Vikings under Kwesi Adofo-Mensah the past 3 years haven't really gone that route. We haven't had a whole lot of draft capital, but it's still working. In 2023 and 2024, we've had a record of 20-14 in those 2 years, and made the playoffs once. Sorry, 2024, 2025, or 2023, 2024. 20-14, made the playoffs once, even though we've had the very few draft picks and minimal production from those draft picks other than Jordan Addison during that time. It's too early to talk about the last year's 2024 class because of things, or the 2025 class that we just selected. But it did get me thinking, Dave, about how you kind of wonder about when does this catch up to the Vikings? Because yes, they've done a great job in free agency the past couple of years, filling holes and solidifying the roster. But as those contracts mature, and as the guys are in-house, homegrown guys like Justin Jefferson and Christian Darrisaw, as their contracts mature and get more expensive, at some point you feel that the Vikings aren't going to be able to go to the free agency spending spree route like they have been able to do, especially this year, to fill out the roster if the draft doesn't start bringing in 2 or 3 guys who are filling important roles on offense and defense. So this is something we got to monitor as things go on, and probably as soon as next year. The Vikings have, I think, got to start having more draft capital and doing a much better job with that draft capital.
Gary's classic. I love Gary.
Yeah. So there's that. Just a couple of things there. And now going to move on to other subjects. And hopefully Dave doesn't lose it. He's losing it.
I love the ex-military guys that are in here. They freaking rock. Yeah. And I hit this too early. I totally spaced you were going over the fewest picks stuff. But
yeah, that's okay.
When Kwesi and crew got here, they were given a mandate. You got to stay competitive. And then we got the competitive rebuild phrase. And the way they stayed competitive was through free agency. It wasn't through the draft, especially as a rookie. Kwesi, in the 2022 draft was turned out to be garbage. He overstepped himself, but he's been learning it, and they get better and better. And I expect this one to be the best of all, even though we only had a one pick in the first round and then all the day 3 picks. But we will see. Anyways,
Dave's going to have a hard time keeping a straight face here with the thread going on downstairs.
Team 3, this week in Vikings land. And in this one, we're starting off with Kevin O'Connell needing to fix it.
Yeah. Well, note to self, Dave, when Kevin O'Connell, after a crushing season-ending loss, goes to the podium in the future, if this happens again, and he specifically calls out a unit that the Viking position unit that the Vikings have to improve on, we better expect that the Vikings are going to attack that with gusto, because that is what they've done this offseason.
And how often does he do that? He does not publicly criticize.
Never. Even units. He never publicly criticized players, right. and he doesn't even do positions. That was really the first time I've ever heard him say that outright, that bluntly like that. And he was very serious about it, as we found out in free agency and now in the draft. When we looked at the positional units, I think back in January, Dave, and tried to assess, like, okay, what are the Vikings going to do here, and who might they change or replace? I remember saying, well, I think they're definitely going to go and do something about the interior, because KOC said that after the Rams loss. But I figured, well, they'll either replace one of the guards and the center, or they might place both guards, but not the center. But I didn't think that they would replace all three, because on the offensive line, Dave, continuity is so important. And I thought that changing out all three, the two guards and the center, would be just a little bit too much disruption to a line where you got to be in sync. And playing together for a large amount of time usually is helpful, as long as those players are competent. Well, I was wrong, because the Vikings, they released Garrett Bradbury. They traded Ed Ingram. They didn't re-sign Dalton Reisner. And then they signed Ryan Kelly to be the new starting center, Will Fries to be the starting right guard, and Blake Randall was around as the starting left guard until Thursday. And then in the draft, the Vikings selected Donovan Jackson, who's going to be your starting left guard in 2025. And so, hey, this is a massive overhaul of the Vikings offensive line. And you can see why they did it, because in the final two games of the Vikings season last year, against Detroit and then particularly against the Rams, the offensive line, it's been a problem for a long time, but they couldn't keep the pocket clean, and they couldn't push guys and move guys on running plays, and in short yardage situations. That was an issue all year long, and it's been an issue during KOC's entire 3 years as head coach. So getting Donovan Jackson, again, like we said at the beginning of the show, he's the final piece to a puzzle, along with getting Freeze and Ryan Kelly, and along with having Brian O'Neill and Christian Darrisaw as your tackles, where we've got an offensive line now that could be really special if guys play the way they've played in the past, or how we expect them to play.
You missed one part of the overhaul, though.
I did?
Yes.
Who? Oh, the coach, Coach Carter.
It started with Coach Carter, and he's supposedly a hard-nosed SOB to work with, but he's made the Pro Bowl as a coach. It's going to be interesting how he fits with Cooper and how that team comes together and how they work. But this is what started it all, before even the free agency and everything else. They hired this guy.
Yes. Good to point out that they made that change in the coaching side of things, and that Carter, has a reputation for being a hard-nosed kind of Tony Sparano.
An asshole. Wouldn't say it.
Yeah. Okay. Being a real dick. But sometimes players need that. But the Vikings had a weakness. KOC was very blunt about it. I don't want to hear anybody complaining that the Vikings did not address this weakness. We don't know how it's going to work out, whether it's going to be as successful as we think it is, but there's no doubt that the Vikings have addressed this as best as they could have. And they were very serious about it, the serious they've ever been. And now we got to see, health is going to be part of the issue here, how quickly they gel and get that continuity and cohesiveness that's so important along the offensive line. But the Vikings have addressed a big weakness, and now we just got to see how it plays out on the field.
Yeah, and as Brian points out, Fries and Kelly's already had chemistry because we got them as a pair, which is going to help, and we all know our tackles will, and it's just training a rookie, and the rookie's a clean slate, so I think that's good. And John mentioned it's going to improve the run game. Yeah, it's going to improve both run and pass, and it's going to keep J.J. McCarthy upright. And this is the biggest change in well over a decade. We've been screaming about it. Gotta fix the O-line. Gotta fix the O-line. They fixed it. At least it looks like they have.
Yes.
We'll find out, once they get on the field and play. But they made the effort. I got to give them an A+ for effort on this one. From
Without
coaching change or coach addition to all the players, A+.
And bringing up coaching, Dave, it's what they've done this offseason, the Vikings. This, I think, puts some heat on Chris Cooper, the offensive line coach, because I think the excuses will have run out after this offseason. If the offensive line doesn't improve quite a bit compared to what we've seen in 2024, 2023, and 2022 under Kevin O'Connell. And if that doesn't happen, I expect you'll see a coaching change at that position, with maybe Carter moving up and Cooper moving on.
And we shall see no more whining TikToks from Reisner.
Yes.
Side me, side me, side me. I'm best friends with Chris Cooper. Side me. No, that's going to end. So
that's that. Moving on.
I thought it rocks. It's all for the benefit of this young fella.
In large part. In large part. And how do you keep an inexperienced pro quarterback and help his development? You give him an offensive line that can protect him and can give you an effective running game so he doesn't have to throw the ball 45 times a game.
And one heck of a set of weapons, which we'll talk about next, because we got a backup.
Yeah, but how does everybody feel about getting Sam Howell as the backup quarterback? As of last week, Dave, we were still talking about it on this show. What is the plan for backup quarterback for the Vikings? When are they going to sign Ryan Tannehill? What is Aaron Rodgers still in play? I'm glad we're done with that.
Sarah's glad we're done with that.
Or maybe we're not. But I get the feeling the national media won't be done with it. But anyhow,
Cousins for that matter.
Yes. However, the Vikings made a trade. They swapped positions in the 5th round yesterday and got Sam Howell to be the backup. And again, happy to hear people's opinions on how they feel about the acquisition of Howell. But ESPN Seth Walder, one of the analytics type writers there, he often shits on a lot of the free agency moves and draft moves, but he felt this was a fine move. But he did say that he felt that the Vikings could have gotten a better backup quarterback like Jacoby Brissett or Jameis Winston just by paying more money instead of giving up draft positional value. One, I don't think Jacoby Brissett is a good backup quarterback, better than Sam Howell. I think he's a very cautious, take no risks kind of quarterback who got run out of New England very early last year. And Jameis Winston was never coming to Minnesota anyway. And I don't think Minnesota wanted him. And I don't think Jameis Winston wanted to come to Minnesota because he would have been backing up J.J. McCarthy.
And he went to the Giants. So
where he's got a shot to start again.
Mhm.
Is he better than Sam Howell? Yes, but something he has in common with Sam Howell is he is, Sam Howell is not a cautious quarterback. He slings it. He had over 600 pass attempts in his 1 year as a starter at Washington.
Nick
I think,
Mullins version 2, only younger and more
well,
coachable.
yes, that was the kind of and a slightly stronger arm, I think, but very much kind of from the Nick Mullins gunslinger mentality, take chances, chuck it and fuck it kind of a attitude. And I feel that this is, as far as getting your backup, he's a better option than Brett Rippon. He's got plenty of starting experience. He only turns 25 in September, so he's still young and there's stuff to work with. And he's had some, during that stint with Washington in 2023, he had some really high, strong moments at times. Now, there were some low lows too, and he got sacked a lot. But going to Minnesota, I think it's a good move for him. One, he never had the weapons in Washington that he's going to have in Minnesota. He didn't have Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson to throw to. He didn't have Aaron Jones or even Jordan Mason to hand off to. And the offensive line that the Vikings have assembled now, which we just talked about, is better than what he was working on with in Washington in 2023. So, first thing is we hope Sam Howell does not take a snap unless it's in victory formation in 2025. Because if he does,
does he have these coaches?
Well, I was just going to get to that too. But if he does, that means McCarthy has either been really ineffective or is injured, and we don't want those two things. But I think he's a good backup quarterback to have. And he's going to be working with Kevin O'Connell and Josh McCown too. And getting Sam Howell into the Kevin O'Connell quarterback reclamation school, I think, is going to do wonders for Howell's career. And it helps the Vikings because they're going to be able to coach up a talented passer who, if he has to go into play, can keep the boat afloat and maybe win you some games. And so the Vikings have solved their backup quarterback situation, at least for this year. And they also potentially, if he moves on after this year, there's a comp pick that they could get in 2027 because of it. So I like the move. And I think the moving up in the 5th round, going down, exchanging 30 spots, it wasn't a big deal to me at that point in the draft.
No, not at all. It's basically almost for free.
Well, yeah, pretty much.
And considering Gary asked the question and Biggs gave the answer, he's on his last year of his rookie contract, which is $1.1 million against the cap. And so it won't count against compensatory pick formula for against us.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, we can turn and develop him. And if he goes off someplace later and earns more than $10 million, that means another pick coming back to us. Or if he develops into a good backup and he wants to stay in Minnesota, hey, all the better too.
That is the other thing. There's nothing wrong with him progressing, and the Vikings feel very comfortable in bringing him back as a quality backup
in 2026.
Again, that's one less position on the roster you have to worry about in 2026 and filling. If the Vikings like what they've seen from Howell, they think he's progressing well. Howell likes being in Minnesota, and I don't think Howell's. It's unlikely. Maybe he get offered more money at the end of the season somewhere else, but I don't think he's going to get to play enough to show that I can be a starter somewhere again. Right. So he's going to have to be looking for another backup position in 2026 if all goes according to plan in Minnesota. And maybe it'll be in Minnesota again.
Yep, exactly. So I think it's it's a brilliant move. We only traded down 30 spots, got him, and we got value. We moved up 45 spots or whatever on the bottom end and got value there. It was basically got him for nothing. And that is so cool. And with that $1.1 million salary, that means we're not paying $10 to $15 million for a backup.
Yes, which you would have had to done if you were signing Tannehill.
Yeah, or somebody like that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Even if it was Kirko, that's what it would be.
Ooh. And, and not to mention, but I will mention, the circus that you'd be creating by bringing in Kirko as the backup in Minnesota. And apparently he wants to come back to Minnesota even as a backup now.
Yeah, and we know Aaron Rodgers wants to come to Minnesota. Everybody wants to come to Minnesota. I think this is brilliant. It's a brilliant move. And I'm seeing in the chat the refs are being pro LA as usual. For the Timberwolves game, that's a shame. But hopefully Timberwolves are overcome and pull it out. All right, that brings us to the last section of this week. And you wanted to talk about Happy Harry.
I did, because this week the Vikings started their first organized team activity. Really, they had some workouts this weekend. So you had some Vikings players and coaches who stepped up to the mic and talked to the media about the offseason, one of them being Harrison Smith. And a few things that Harrison Smith said in that press availability I found were interesting. The first thing, the most interesting thing, was that he said it took him very little time after the season was over to say that, yes, I'm coming back for year 14. And where he said, he said even after the loss to the Rams that he felt, I get the feeling that this isn't the last time I'm going to put on the pads. And he's back. And that surprised me, Dave. I don't know if it surprised you, because at the post game, when they interviewed Hitman after the Rams loss, which is a crushing, disappointing loss for fans, but also the players after the year that they had, Hitman looked like a beaten guy. Like, he looked like, I'm done. This was my last shot at getting to the Super Bowl, and we blew it. And I'm not going to do this anymore. Well, that was, he took the loss hard, but clearly that up there, that what I thought he was feeling was not how Hitman was feeling. And he sounds pumped to be back, really pumped. And that is awesome. And the big reason that he's pumped is because of the leadership that the Vikings have. Kevin O'Connell, he talked specifically about Kevin O'Connell and the culture that he has built and how smooth things work around Egan with the football team. And Brian Flores, Hitman just loves playing for Brian Flores, loves the mental gymnastics that he has to go through every week, loves the back and forth between him and Flo. And Brian Flores is working on getting Hitman back for 2026 for a 15th season.
I saw that.
Yeah. So even though we thought, Hitman, he's back and he's taking it year to year at this point in time, but this will be the last year. It's got to be the last year. Maybe it won't be the last year. But I'm just happy that Hitman, he sounds pumped. He sounds ready to go. And I'm happy that he's back, not just because he can still get it done on the field. He's still a solid player, but I just think he's invaluable with his presence and the leadership that he brings. And if you're a Vikings player, especially a young player, especially a young defensive player in the secondary, there is no way that you can not, you can go to Hitman. He's seen it all. You can go to him as a resource on how to be a pro, how to train, how to eat, how to work in the weight room, how to work in the film room, all of those things. It's just like having another coach on the team. Plus, he's still a good player. So just so happy that Harrison Smith is back, and I think he still has more to give for the Vikings. And I'm really interested to see how Hitman and B-Flow, what they've got cooked up with the new additions like Javon Hargrave and Jonathan Allen and Isaiah Rodgers, and how this defense, which was pretty damn good last year, how it evolves and gets even better in 2025.
And it's going to. Now, what I love is KOC meets with him once a week because they're the same age.
Yes, yeah.
and they bullshit. And I think it's absolutely wonderful. And if he and B-Flow absolutely, love each other. And if he's saying, hey, yeah, we're doing, it's a wonderful kinetic relationship between the three of them, and how that defense is going to work and how they're trying to push to get him in the Hall of Fame once he gets there. All he needs, 3 more interceptions and he'll have 40.
Yeah.
It'll be something. And the fact that he's juiced and pumped to come back again. And he said there's basically no decision. He wants to be back. This is the most excited he's been in years. And an excited hitman is going to be a dangerous one to opposing teams, and we all love that. So, and his mentorship of the young defensive backfield, you can't get that anywhere else. I think it's a brilliant move. Brilliant. Well, that's all three themes for today. And any last words, everybody?
I do want to just quickly touch on, because I didn't get a chance, the whole trade back thing, Dave, that the Vikings didn't do. And Kwesi Adofo-Mensah was talking about how he used a golf analogy to explain on Thursday about all of that and why he and the Vikings felt that sticking at 24 was the best move. But I guess there's going to be the safe thing for the Vikings to do, I think, in the draft, and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, the thing that would have got him, I think, less criticism would have been actually to trade down and acquire more draft capital, because that was a lot of the chatter. The Vikings need to do that. And, they've got so few picks. This is a very important draft for Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, but I think I feel that there's going to be like your opinion on the Vikings drafting and whether you agree with the trade up, the not trading down or not, is going to be based a lot on whether you trust Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and his drafting ability. And I understand if you don't, because the drafting has not been up to snuff so far. So I think that there's legit reasons to wonder if this was the right thing to do, and we'll see how it all plays out. But I think there's no questions about so far, I think, in what Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and his ability to sniff out good free agent deals. But it's the drafting where I think that's the final piece of the puzzle for him as a general manager, and being convincing Viking fans that he's a general manager that can do what Howie Roseman has done in Philly and get you to the Super Bowl and win it.
Yep, absolutely. I'm looking forward to this season. I've not been so excited. I think we're closest we've been to being absolute Super Bowl contenders. And I'll say that, and since I was a kid. So it's a long, long time.
It is. And
I'm excited.
The JJ McCarthy thing is, it's like his rookie year, really. And we're just there's that plus everything else the Vikings have done. A lot to be excited about, and a bit of uncertainty too, I guess, about how that's all going to turn out. But I think you and I are both in agreement. We're pretty pumped about things getting going here and what the Vikings can do in 2025.
And as they get going this week, we'll be back next Sunday to talk about it. We should have some rookies in the building between now and then. So what do we say, buddy?
We say SKOL Vikings, baby.
SKOL Vikings. Thanks for joining us, everybody in the chat. Thanks for watching, and thanks for listening. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell, and rate us on your favorite podcast aggregator. Darren and Dave, thank you for watching this episode of Two Old Bloggers. We look forward to seeing you on every show on the new Vikings First and SKOL. You can find our podcasts as part of the Fans First Sports Network. Sports takes for the fan, from the fan. SKOL, everybody!